Well, thanks very much, everybody, for joining and looking forward to this discussion. We're going to please ask questions as we go through, and I'll sort of bring things up, and we've also reserved some time at the end for a Q&A. So maybe if we just go to the first slide. So as we know from there have been a number of cell and gene therapies that have been launched in recent years and which have had significant clinical benefits for patients across a number of different therapy areas. And really, this is sort of driven by a combination of the clinical benefit itself, the overall response rate that we're seeing to these therapies, and the durability of benefit that we're seeing. That has really driven a huge amount of the excitement in cell and gene therapies and the promise in a number of different areas. But as we know, a lot of these products have also been facing a number of headwinds, right? So if we move to the next slide, we can see that the penetration is sort of yet to achieve what maybe I think a lot of manufacturers are hoping, really driven by a number of different factors that have surround this. So first and foremost, health systems just haven't necessarily been ready. They haven't had the processes in place. They haven't had the expertise in place that allow these products to get to patients in a timely manner. The second is that the patient treatment networks, the sort of the referrals going from the community settings to the specialist settings, is relatively immature, and sort of how, where, why, when these products, these patients need to be referred to these specialist centers is still sort of in its infancy in many markets. And we're seeing things like CAR T is really only being used in sort of up to sort of 25% of patients that could be eligible for using CAR T in the US today. There are obviously issues that we're all familiar with regards to manufacturing and logistics, and why we're seeing a number of companies investing quite significant amounts in manufacturing across a number of different areas to try and overcome some of these bottlenecks to manufacturing and logistics. And the other key element as well is the economics. So the payment mechanisms, payment amounts, funding flows, processes, risk sharing agreements. There's a huge amount of complexity involved there. Clearly, some processes have been unblocked in recent weeks with regards to some of the change in the financing in the US, but clearly it still presents issues for manufacturers. Those are likely to vary by different therapy area, and those are likely to vary a bit by country. So today we want to sort of talk about sort of what are some of the ways in which these issues are being overcome, thinking about from a payer perspective, from a provider perspective, from a patient perspective, how are different challenges being overcome? What are the opportunities so that really patients can really benefit from cell and gene therapies in the way that we all hope that they will do, given sort of our excitement and interest in this area. And we've got three great panelists today who's going to walk us through some of their perspectives from where they sit in terms of what the issues have been and what are the things that we need to do as individuals and as a field in order to realize the value of cell and gene therapy. So I'm going to start with Oscar, Oscar Salgado from ASC, who's going to give us a little bit about his background, and maybe talk a little bit about sort of how can we help the market become more ready for cell and gene therapies.
Thanks for having me. I'm Oscar Segurado, Chief Medical Officer of ASC Therapeutics. After almost 3 decades in the industry, over the past 5 years, I've been focusing on gene therapy, gene editing, and cell therapy. Previously, I held executive roles in clinical development and medical affairs with large biopharma, AbbVie, Abbott, and Becton Dickinson. My clinical and academic background is in immunology and molecular biology. I think that the focus of this session on the impact of disease and science awareness to accelerate commercial success nicely applies to the revolution that we're experiencing in medicine. We have entered into what I call medicine 2.0, driven by omics, especially genomics, precision and personalized medicine. The ongoing revolution, mostly driven by the way by cell and gene therapy, requires, in my view, a different approach to the healthcare space in general. We need a different type of talent in our organizations capable to communicate efficiently very complex therapeutic modalities and mechanism of action. Definitely, gene therapy, cell therapy require know-how, a background in science that has not been usually required for the entire organization that is facing the healthcare providers, payers, and patients. I don't think that the current model of separate R&D, medical, marketing, and commercial teams are ready to tackle this challenging landscape. We need to ensure that payers, HCPs, and patients are educated and ready to understand these complex concepts and their implications, such as our ability to treat rare and inherited diseases. We are moving now into a space that was absolutely unthinkable a few years ago, where big pharma was focusing on blockbusters. Now we are able to go into very narrow spaces, and big pharma is happy to do that. As a case in point, my team at ASC Therapeutics is developing a second generation gene therapy and a third generation gene editing to cure hemophilia. And note that I said cure, not treat. So we need to justify $1 million pricing for a single infusion, one and done. And as a potential suggestion, I suggest that we consider developing a solid educational framework for payers, HCPs, and patients beyond our usually marketing and commercial channels, maybe even considering an industry-wide strategy through partnerships.
Super. Thanks very much, Oscar. So maybe I'm going to hand the baton now to Chai. So Chai Rogers from GSK is going to give a little bit of her background and maybe some perspectives on how can we get more patients to be treated by some of these innovative therapies.
Great. Thanks so much, Dean, and thanks, Oscar, for your background and your perspective as well, too. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Chai Chen Rogers. I am currently at GSK in our global oncology organization on the commercial side of the business. I have responsibility. I'm the commercial lead for our early portfolio in the cell therapy space in oncology. And with respect to this particular question overall, when it comes to getting patients successfully from the community setting into the hospital, this one coming back to what Oscar shared with us around education. Education is critically important because in this space, these modalities are relatively new to those in the community. So they are not nearly as aware as those in the certified treatment centers or those who have been doing the research as to what these products could potentially do, but also the needs around administration and just general education overall in terms of what to expect, because it is a little bit more involved. I shouldn't just say a little bit more, but definitely more involved than the typical treatments that we have today in oncology. And so there's a lot of prep and thought that needs to go in place early on. The other thing too is, in these early days, I think it's the responsibility of those of us who are developing and trying to help paint a picture for those providers as to who the right patient is to actually get these therapies, because we want them to have as good of an experience as possible in terms of sending the appropriate patient forward to these centers, because nothing can be more disappointing than that patient actually going forward and actually finding out that, they don't qualify for the treatment because they don't meet certain criteria that have been specified overall. And especially for, those patients who are potentially looking at this as extending their life, that's a hard road to potentially go down, spending that time traveling to a treatment center overall. So education, and then also making sure that we share who the right patient is, or as much paint the picture of who the right patient is who will most likely benefit from these treatments, are important. So before I hand back off, I'll just also provide a little bit more on my background. So prior to coming to GSK, I've been with GSK for a little bit over a year now. I was previously at Merck in a commercial function as well too, working on Keytruda on both the US and the global side of the business, bringing that particular product in several indications forward. And then prior to that, my background is quite a bit in vaccines in both the R&D as well as the commercialization side. So thanks very much, Dean.
Thanks very much, Chai. And I think we'll pick up some of the points that both you and Oscar made, sort of in subsequent parts of the discussion. And maybe I'll hand to our last panelist. It's Kelly Page from Takeda, and Kelly's if you can give us a bit of your background and sort of as well, sort of highlight maybe some of the issues you see around some of the economics and in cell and gene therapy, and what are some of the opportunities there.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel today. I'm Kelly Page. I'm the head of global commercialization for cell therapy at Takeda Oncology. I've been in the role for the past few months, but prior to this, I was our business unit head in Germany and held multiple other commercial and actually R&D positions during my time at Takeda. I want to start by just saying something about cancer. About 20 years ago, I was impacted pretty significantly by cancer, and it's sort of where I started my career. My dad and two other close relatives were all diagnosed with lymphoma within a couple of months of each other. And it really made me see, how much need there is for new cancer therapies. When I moved to Takeda, I had the opportunity to lead the team that launched our lymphoma product, Adcetris, and got to see what novel, innovative products can do to really impact the lives of cancer patients. And I'm really excited to be here now talking today about another new scientific endeavor in terms of cell therapy and Takeda's entry into cell therapy for oncology. The question is around the economics, and I want to start by saying that the early cell therapies, particularly the CAR Ts for oncology, have really paved the way and made cell therapy a reality for patients. I think it's now the opportunity that we can optimize cell therapy and bring it to even more patients. But to do that, we need to resolve some of the issues that have hampered their uptake since coming to the market. We all know about some of the manufacturing challenges and needing to make it feasible to get cell therapy to more patients and patients around the world without delay and without some of the challenges. We know the difficulties and the costs associated with managing AEs and long follow-up times. And we know that for many institutions, it is a real challenge to be able to handle the costs associated with the total cost of care relative to cell therapy. And so, the good news is, you see a lot of innovation happening to change this. On one side, you see innovative approaches, the change to DRG and the reimbursement in the US, the application of NTAP for innovative products clearly shows that there is the opportunity to make sure that the value of these products is assessed differently and the cost of these products is covered to the extent possible. And I think the other opportunity is for new novel agents to move forward from where the first cell therapies have launched. Now we're moving into the world of allogeneic treatments. If allogeneic treatments are successful, we have the opportunity to reduce some of the follow-up, reduce the monitoring, take some of the uncertainty out of the manufacturing, which overall should have a positive impact on total cost of care. And so looking forward, the new science and the new innovations should really drive us to a better, hopefully better economic situation for manufacturers and for hospitals.
Super. Thanks very much, Kelly. So I want to pick up and continue with that sort of theme of new science in the first instance. So Chi, I'm going to maybe go to you first. Sort of, if we sort of think about some of these new cell types, these new sort of cell technologies, what do you think is really going to be the beneficent? How are different stakeholders going to benefit from these new innovations that are really building upon the successes that we've seen with these first generation CAR Ts?
Yeah, so Dean, in terms of moving forward and where the field is going, certainly being able to get the cells to work and demonstrate proof of concept has been really encouraging. And, our heme colleagues who have really been able to, move the ball down the field when it comes to blood-based cancers has been encouraging. As we start to set our sights on solid tumors overall, there are some significant challenges there. And I think some of the innovations in the space in terms of, for instance, better tumor recognition. So how can we make sure that the targets that we're choosing, that we're getting on target, but limiting off tumor type of activity. So we're seeing advances in that field with, Boolean logic and not or switches, coming in place overall. And that, can certainly mean, for the patient, better efficacy, less side effects, coming back to some of the things Kelly was speaking to in terms of managing AEs and long-term sequelae. Those are things that, could potentially limit that and could, reduce cost overall. In terms of thinking about, for instance, the tumor environment and, once we actually get cells into the tumor environment itself could be very immunosuppressive. So there are certainly activities going on to try to get over that immunosuppressive environment. So once the cells actually get there, they can do what they need to do and bring in the rest of the immune system to fight the cancer. So that in of itself translates hopefully to better efficacy overall, and we'll see tumor reduction or tumor shrinkage. Patients will certainly benefit there too. Beyond those other activities, we can certainly increase cell persistence. So once you actually get the cells there and recognizing, you don't want to exhaust them right away. And so if the cells are staying around, if you can get them to persist and stay longer, that again benefits the patient. And you can think about having, instead of, doing multiple infusions like we typically see today, or patients that have to take medications on a regular basis, coming back to what Oscar was saying, once and done. This could be a once and done, which is a really great benefit overall, not just to patients, but just to the system and those who are managing the patients overall.
Okay, that's super. I think that's really helpful. I think there's clearly a number of areas that are important. And maybe Kelly, I think you highlighted a few times the benefit of allogeneic cells. Could you sort of talk a little bit from your perspective on how you think allogeneic could really be impactful?
Sure. And so I think there's at least three ways that allogeneic products will differentiate themselves. The first is their off-the-shelf nature. So if a product is off the shelf, it means that a patient can have their treatment when they need it, where they need it. Now, why is this important? We know from the CAR-T experience that it's taking a couple of weeks to get product to patients in the US. From my experience in Germany recently, it's up to 40 or 50 days for patients to have the turnaround time they need to get the cells back. Many patients can't wait that long. Many patients need bridging chemotherapy. Many patients have progressed in a disease to the point that they can't then be treated with the cell therapy. So it's really important that new products shorten this time and really have the medicine where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. I think the second opportunity is around safety. We've mentioned safety a couple of times on the panel, but if you have products or medicines that are safer, and look at our CAR-NK platform that we're developing in collaboration with MD Anderson, you may be able to open up the range of treatment centers and the range of patients that are able to actually get cell therapy. And that would be really important so you can expand the number of the broad populations that may be able to receive these treatments. I think the third and maybe the most important is outpatient. If we are able to consistently deliver cell therapy in an outpatient setting, there's two big opportunities there. The first is for patients. If a patient can be treated near home, can be with their family, there is the opportunity to have an overall better quality of life while they're going through their care. The second is for treatment centers. An outpatient setting could reduce that total cost of care. There's less inpatient time, obviously, but also associated services, associated follow-up times, which would all create an economic benefit, hopefully, for cancer centers. So you can kind of see the outpatient value of this as being a win-win for both patients and for the centers where they're being treated.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you both. So I want to sort of, one of the things we want to do is get us some perspectives from the audience as well. So on your screens, you can see the right-hand side, there's an opportunity to do a poll. So we want to sort of get the audience's reaction, right? If we think about all of the cancer cell therapies that are likely to exist in the next few years, and we sort of fast forward to 2025, what do you think are going to be the most prominent cancer cell therapies in 2025? We've given you sort of the option of 4 different cell types. We've given you the option of autologous versus allogeneic. We sort of taking into consideration all of these points that Chi and Kelly made right around clinical efficacy, durability, safety, convenience for patients, as well as maybe some of the cost effectiveness components of these. What do people think from their perspective are going to be the most prominent products out there? Maybe your company is developing it, maybe another company is developing it, maybe somebody isn't already developing this that you think is going to be that's going to be important. So when we'll get some results from that in a couple of moments, but maybe sort of while we're waiting for those to come through, maybe Oscar, just sort of just in terms of sort of cancer cell therapies, what else do you think we also need to be considering that maybe you want to highlight that Chi or Kelly have already mentioned, or something else to add to the mix?
So I agree what Kelly and Chia have been saying in regards to CAR-Ts especially, and the importance of allogeneic cells therapies. We are at ASC Therapeutics are also developing an allogeneic stem cell therapy for patients with graft versus host disease. And we are also experiencing all these aspects that are absolutely relevant, especially on being able to have a rapid turnaround on these cells being developed to provided to the patients. And I just would like to highlight that several of the aspects that have been mentioned in terms of ensuring that the patients understand what type of therapy are they getting, that we get more patients that are incorporated into this type of therapies is absolutely essential.
Okay, super. Well, thank you. So I think I think the results are interesting, right? In terms of if people are able to see the results from whereby sort of the current model, right, of CAR-T is dominant, and people, sort of half of the people say CAR-T is going to continue to be the most prominent therapy, but there's going to be a switch towards allogeneic, and more generally across the piece, there's going to be a switch towards allogeneic, and sort of the novel product that doesn't really exist at the moment that's most anticipated is going to be allogeneic natural killer cells. Maybe just to sort of get a reaction from the panel, is anybody surprised by that outcome? Maybe Kelly, I could come to you first. Is sort of, would you have anticipated this sort of response from the audience?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, you know, everybody knows that, as I said earlier in our opening, that, you know, the CAR-Ts have certainly opened up the possibility of cell therapy. But if we are going to make it within reach of more patients and really, you know, maybe fulfill the promise of cell therapy, we have to be looking towards the other platforms that can solve some of the issues. So it's good to see that people feel that way.
Chi, any sort of additional response from your side?
Yeah, and Dean, I'm just going to correct you now. So it's Chi, no worries.
Sorry, Chi.
So no worries, no worries. So like Kelly, I am not surprised in terms of the responses that we see here. I think, you know, CAR-Ts, not surprising, are still on the list there simply because they're, you know, kind of the first in the space. And so I would imagine that the improvements will continue to build upon the improvements. But with respect to allo, it really is about, you know, speeding up that time and getting these products out to as many patients as possible. And I think Kelly really hit on the key that, if we can solve some of the challenges around safety and get this into the community, that's really going to drive a lot of uptake, but also meet a lot of need overall. So.
Okay, super, thank you. So maybe Oscar, I just want to switch gears a little bit with regards to gene therapies, right? I think a lot of the discussion so far was focused upon sort of cell therapies and how some of the technologies are advancing there. You highlighted some of the more gene therapy and gene editing technologies you're working on. Could you sort of just expand a little bit about how some of the benefits you see coming there from new approaches?
So let's start providing a little bit background on gene therapy. Some people may think that this is a kind of new therapeutic modality, but the reality is that the basic understanding and work was performed several decades ago. Even for hemophilia, the area I'm working on, the first patients were treated about 1 decade ago. And several companies have been advancing a number of programs that are absolutely crucial to our understanding of gene therapy. And I'm talking specifically about the work done in hemophilia, although it's also very relevant, the work that was conducted with companies like Avexis, acquired by Novartis, where they were focusing on spinal muscular atrophy and how they were really perfecting the way an adeno-associated virus could enter the nervous system and being able to produce a missing protein in a neuron. I would also like to talk a little bit about an area that really overlaps between cell therapy and gene therapy. And this is the way we bioengineer either the cells or we produce these constructs that are going to be used in gene therapy. And this is the fact that we are using viruses. And I know viruses don't have a very good rap lately, but we're talking about harmless ones. And the ones that have been used by the industry are adeno-associated viruses, AAV, and lentiviruses. Some work has been also done with retroviruses and adenoviruses. AAV and lentivirus are efficient tools for gene transfer. And it's very important that we understand that because they can establish induced gene expression in quiescent cells and do not lead to an immune response once they are in the host. So in terms of AAVs for gene therapy, it's very important also that we understand that these vectors have limitations. They cannot have a payload that goes beyond 4.5 kilobases. That's important because, for instance, factor VIII, which is the one we're working on for hemophilia A, is much larger than that. But what we have been doing and what the scientists discovered is that they can delete completely an entire domain, B domain, and still the protein that is produced is going to be fully functional. Another possibility, as I mentioned, is lentivirus, which is used for CAR-Ts and other modalities. And by the way, every time I hear Kelly or Chai talking about and also the audience about all these iterations of cellular therapies using many cells that I've been working for many years, NK cells, macrophages, and T cells, I am really elated as an immunologist. So these technologies have been developed, as I mentioned, for over several decades. And there have been great progress on perfecting not just the bioengineering of different types of viruses and promoters, but also ensuring that these cells, especially in the gene therapy space, have a clear affinity for certain types that you want to use as biofactories. So, of course, there is a lot of research also on non-viral delivery of DNA and RNA directly into the cells. I don't think we are ready for prime time, but this can be a clever choice for transient modification of cells, which then can be used for cell therapy or gene therapy in the case of, for instance, hemophilia. It has been already approved, and there are some studies going on where instead of just going directly with the infusion of the vectors into the individual, you are manipulating stem cells and giving the patient these cells that are going to produce factor VIII for patients with hemophilia.
Super, thank you. So I want to sort of change gears a little bit because I think some of the areas we've highlighted in the discussion have been around partnerships and sort of what those may look like going forward, given the sort of the breadth of stakeholders that need to be involved. So we've got another poll for you to sort of think about what's the extent to which different organizations are partnering, but maybe sort of touching upon, there've been a number of questions that we've had from the audience around the role of patient association groups, the sort of the partnership with providers, with the sort of the duration of those partnerships. So maybe I'm just going to go to Kelly in the first instance, right? So when we think about larger players like Takeda, right, and the approach to partnering with providers, what do you think is going to be important to establish from your perspective for a successful outcome for that partnership?
Right. This is a really interesting question, because partnership, we think of partnerships as two-party in some ways, but it's actually much broader than that. We're used to partnering with the HCP, or we're used to partnering with, the patient organization through different mechanisms. But now I think we all need to kind of think about this together as a holistic, what happens to the patient during their journey using cell therapy. So if we look at it as just the treatment center, it's not just about the HCP. It's about the people who are receiving the product. It's about the people who are making reimbursement decisions. It's about making sure that the nurses and other staff have the training they need, so that every point of care along that patient's journey is thought through, and it's enabled. Cell therapy is really complex. And small details can make the difference between, a patient who successfully receives their treatment and has a good quality of life while doing it, versus somebody who maybe doesn't. So we need to think about all of those micro moments, and what kind of partnership do you need to make sure that there's ultimately success in that care. We need to think about the partnership between payers and regulators and industry a bit differently. Not only is there an educational component about cell therapy, but we need to think about benefit and value differently, and how those assessments will be made so that the right clinical studies and the right data packages can ultimately be provided to make sure that an assessment of value can be done. And we also think about partnerships internally. If I think about, Takeda's oncology cell therapy portfolio, it's based in the discovery organization around world-class partnerships with world-class research institutions to be based on the best science. We don't do all of it ourselves, but we really look to academic partnerships. Moving that forward, we collaborate in the clinic with MD Anderson and Sloan Kettering on 2 of those collaborations to make sure we have the best clinical minds thinking about these programs. I think it's partnering across the board, whether it be with these academics, whether it be with payers and regulators, and whether it be with partners in these academic and treatment facilities, to make sure that we are getting the best products, best treatments that we can to patients as rapidly as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to sort of pick up that point around patients with CHAI. So I think patients and patient association groups are going to be an important part of as these partnerships as they evolve. What's your thinking around there in terms of how can we more effectively partner with patient association groups to help get these therapies to patients?
Yeah, so Dean, that's a great question. And thinking about that, the engagement with patient advocacy organizations probably has to occur much earlier than we've traditionally thought about overall, because it is a complex space. And so, if you haven't started having dialogues with these patient advocacy groups, I think it would be very difficult to imagine that 6, 9, even 12 months prior to when you anticipate bringing your product on the market, that they would be in a space that, they would be able to help advise you on some of these more challenging things around educating the patients, what the patients do and don't understand, what they will need to understand to be ready to be able to, use a cell therapy, let alone find, a site or a provider that, can actually administer the product for them if they are eligible. And so really this is about planning and coming in early and ahead of time. The other thing too here in terms of partnerships is this is one of those things where we need to be thinking about this is a long-term relationship with these advocacy groups overall, because these patients, I think as both Oscar and Kelly alluded to earlier, the monitoring for receiving a cell therapy product is a long time. And so these patient advocacy groups will probably be with these patients for significantly longer than, maybe what we anticipate overall, because we will be monitoring these patients into the future. And so you want to make sure that you're engaging early, or I think we should make sure that we're engaging early, that we're making space in terms of how we're planning to bring our products to the market, to continue to include advocacy organizations, not just in the initial launch period, but further and beyond, because these patients are going to have a lot of questions, and they're going to be looking to the advocacy groups, especially outside of the US, where, manufacturers can really not interact with patients overall. And those advocacy groups and providers are really going to be your conduit to those patients.
Thanks very much. So maybe Oscar, I want you to maybe pick up a point that Kelly highlighted as well, right, with regards to external collaboration. So we know that companies often collaborate, often with the same leading treatment centers, but obviously as well, maybe companies may need to think about how do they collaborate with each other in order as part of that ecosystem. So how do you see different companies, large and small, partnering with each other in this space?
So I will start saying that this is a very hot topic. Having different companies working with each other is not something that we usually see. I agree totally with Kelly and Chai about the importance of how critical it is to ensure that patients, providers, and payers are educated and understand the potential and limitations of gene and cell therapies. What we usually hear and what the patients are especially going to hear is normally bad news. In the past few days, I've been hearing about CRISPR, how it can produce some kind of problems on embryonic processes, which has nothing to do with the way we are using CRISPR for gene editing of patients with hemophilia and other conditions where we are really not affecting or impacting the embryo in some way. So again, we indeed need to work together. And I think that it would be good to being able to create a unified curriculum across companies, ensuring that we have the right tools and talent to communicate efficiently. And this is critical for the industry. In other words, senior executives, for instance, should seek and encourage partnership. Let me give you an example of one way I've been using lately to explain gene therapy to lay people. I've been talking about the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. And I was explaining how there is a rocket, which would be our viral vector. There is a learner module, which would be our actual transgene, and a promoter, which is the propulsion capsule. Guess what? Someone that had at home a 3D printer sent me this, which is a kind of way to explain, here you have the module, it even opens and closes. And I'm able to explain in some way how you need this promoter to be able to produce the protein. So this is one example. What if we all use something similar, a way to explain with analogies how these extraordinarily complex scientific processes work? So again, just an idea.
No, and I think that's really helpful. And I think it's just we need to think more holistically about how do we clearly articulate the benefit of these therapies in a way that people can really understand the benefits associated with them for a variety of different people. Maybe just to sort of touch on the poll results, we can see actually there's only sort of about 15 to 20% of participants actually are starting to have these partnership discussions at the moment, which I think highlights, we think they're important, but it's an area where there's clearly more work to be done, let's say, in terms of building things out into the future. And maybe as we sort of think more generally about the future, just in the last few minutes, we'll just put up another poll to run in the background with regards to how people anticipate the penetration of different therapies to be and how successful different therapies can be. And I just want to integrate into that a couple of questions from the audience and also things that have come up, and maybe Kelly, just to sort of pick up one of the questions for you in the first instance around what companies need to do internally. So what do you think are the lessons that you've learned? What have you seen done well in terms of how do companies really galvanize the organization behind some of these technologies so that they're getting it right quicker, sooner, etc.?
Yeah, I think cell therapy is resulting in companies, everyone wants to be agile, but it really forces you to have to be innovative and agile. And that's hard for larger companies to do sometimes. We have to move away from a cookie cutter approach of, here is the approach we want to take for all customers or all stakeholders who are using cell therapy, which was the way, let's just say 10 years ago, we moved to more segmented approaches. Now we're really going into individualized approaches where we have to be nimble enough internally to be able to meet the needs of different stakeholders, of different customers. We're going to have a range. If allogeneic treatments can move, from a few academic centers to a broader base of treating physicians potentially in the community, we're going to have different ranges of center capabilities. We're going to have different ranges of experience with cell therapy, and it's going to be up to companies to be able to customize an approach that meets the needs of those individuals to make sure that their needs get met and that they can get these therapies safely and timely to the patients who need them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So maybe one question that's come up, and maybe Chai, I'm going to ask you this question, right, with regards to payment and costs. I think there's obviously a lot of concern about value for some of these payments and about how these can be articulated in a way that's clear and acceptable. Is there anything that you think that we can be doing as a group of organizations to sort of more clearly articulate and educate people around the value of these therapies that maybe hasn't been as holistic in the past?
Yeah, so that's a big question overall in terms of how do we get to the value, because we are in the earlier days of these particular therapies coming forward, and so I think it's definitely around well-designed clinical studies to show the initial benefits, right, and then also following up on the benefits overall to say what are the long-term benefits and being able to clearly articulate that. The other thing I think as as an industry that we can do is those providers who are giving these products, they're going to be the ones that we're looking to help us gather the data around the long-term benefits of these, cell and gene therapies overall. And so whatever we can do to standardize and make easy the collection of these data, so that way we can get to that point sooner rather than later of showing that, yes, not only are you getting great responses, but you're getting durable responses that will hopefully in the future translate into better survival. The more we can do to simplify the gathering for those providers and those participating in these type of studies for us, I think the faster we will get to that point, because the more we make it complicated, the harder it gets. And so part of this, I think, comes down to saying, okay, simplify as much as we possibly can and only be different where we absolutely have to be between all of the within the industry, right? We all want differentiation. We all want to be unique. We all want our products to, do well. But especially in these early days where we can simplify and help the adoption occur through simplification, let's do that and only be different where we absolutely have to be.
No, absolutely. Super. So maybe we're about to close, but I'm just going to ask all of the participants just to sort of give me one or two sentences just to leave the audience, why are you enthusiastic about the future in cell and gene therapy, right? What do you think how it's going to be realized, right? So maybe Oscar, if I sort of start with you, why are you enthusiastic about the future of cell and gene therapy?
So I'm connecting everything to what I mentioned at the beginning, Medicine 2.0, and that's all about personalized and precision medicine. I think that the key driver is precision diagnostics, the use of biomarkers, identifying the right patient for the right therapy. So I think that that's a concept that is also to be used for education of our entire industry, payers, and definitely patients.
Super. And Kelly, same question to you. Why are you enthusiastic about cell and gene therapy?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of, we have an election tomorrow in the US, right? And not to make a political statement, it's only that healthcare has been a big topic of discussion. And no matter what happens, we're still going to be focusing on the best science and getting the best assets and new medicines out to patients who are waiting. And that's a great place to be. We're doing something that we're really passionate about moving, the field forward based on really innovative science, ultimately to meet the needs of patients who really need new treatments. And that's a really good place to be.
And Chai, sort of last word for you.
Yeah.
Why are you enthusiastic?
So in addition to what Oscar and Kelly shared, the spaces, is we are getting to the point where we are able to harness what's inside us to help us. And that's such a huge leap forward to be able to, understand even more, our own bodies and how our bodies can actually help us fight off disease and disease like cancer. And so that leap forward, if we can do this, then I think the sky's the limit.
Super. Well, thank you all very much. I think this has been a great discussion. We've touched on a number of different important topics, and it's been really helpful. So thank you very much.